Cliff Richard.
Sir Cliff Richard OBE is a British pop singer, musician, performer, actor and philanthropist. He is the third top-selling singles artist in the United Kingdom's history, with total sales of over 21 million units in the UK, and has reportedly sold an estimated 250 million records worldwide. With his backing group The Shadows, Richard, originally positioned as a rebellious rock and roll singer in the style of Little Richard and Elvis Presley, dominated the British popular music scene in the pre-Beatles period of the late 1950s and early 1960s. His 1958 hit single Move It is often described as Britain's first authentic rock and roll song, and John Lennon once claimed that before Cliff and the Shadows, there had been nothing worth listening to in British music. Increased focus on his Christian faith and subsequent softening of his music later led to a more middle-of-the-road pop image, sometimes venturing into contemporary Christian music. Over a career spanning more than 50 years, Richard has become a fixture of the British entertainment world, amassing many gold and platinum discs and awards, including 3 Brit Awards and 2 Ivor Novello Awards. He has had more than 130 singles, albums and EPs make the UK Top 20, more than any other artist, and holds the record, with Elvis Presley, as the only act to make the UK singles charts in all of its first 6 decades, 1950s-2000s. He has achieved 14 UK number 1 singles, or 18, depending on the counting methodology, and is the only singer to have had a number 1 single in the UK in 5 consecutive decades, the 1950s through to the 1990s. In 2008, he celebrated his 50th anniversary in music by releasing a greatest hits album, featuring the new track Thank You for a Lifetime, which reached number 3 in the UK singles chart. In November 2013, Richard released his latest album, The Fabulous Rock 'n' Roll Songbook, which became the 100th album of his career. Richard has never achieved the same impact in the United States despite 8 US top 40 singles, including the million-selling Devil Woman, and We Don't Talk Anymore, the latter becoming the first to reach the Billboard Hot 100's top 40 in the 1980s by a singer who had been in the top 40 in the 1950s, 1960s and 1970s. In Canada, Richard achieved moderate success in the 1980s with several albums reaching platinum status. He has remained a popular music, film, and television personality in Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Northern Europe and Asia, and he retains a following in other countries.
Biography. 1940-58, Childhood and Adolescence.
Harry Roger Webb was born in India at King George's Hospital, Victoria Street, in Lucknow, which was then part of British India, or the British Raj. His parents were Roger Oscar Webb, a manager for a catering contractor that serviced the Indian Railways, and the former Dorothy Marie Daisley. Richard is primarily of English heritage, but he has one great-grandmother who was half Welsh and half Spanish, born of a Spanish great-great-grandmother named Emmeline Joseph Rebro. The Spanish ancestry gave Richard and his mother their slightly dark complexions. The Webb family lived in a modest home in Magborough, near the main shopping centre of Hazrat Ganj. Dorothy's mother served as the dormitory matron at the La Martiniere Girls' School. Richard has 3 sisters. In 1948, following Indian independence, the family embarked on a 3-week sea voyage to Tilbury, Essex, England aboard the SS Ranchi. The Webbs moved from comparative wealth in India, where they had servants and lived in a company-supplied flat at Howrah near Calcutta, to a semi-detached house in Carshalton. Harry Webb attended a local primary school, Stanley Park Juniors, in Carshalton. In 1949 his father obtained employment in the credit control office of Thorn Electrical Industries, and the family moved in with other relatives in Waltham Cross, Hertfordshire, where he attended Kings Road Junior Mixed Infants School until a 3-bedroom council house in Shashunt was allocated to them in 1950. He then attended Shashunt Secondary Modern School from 1952 to 1957. The school was later renamed Riversmead School before being rebuilt and renamed Bishop's Lee School. As a member of the top stream, he stayed on beyond the minimum leaving age to take GCE ordinary level examinations and gained a pass in English literature. He then started work as a filing clerk for a company called Atlas Lamps. A development of retirement flats, Cliff Richard Court, has been named after him in Shushunt. Harry Webb became interested in skiffle. His father bought him a guitar at 16 and he formed the Quintones vocal group in 1957, before singing in the Dictiag skiffle group.
1958-63, Success and Stardom.
Harry Webb became lead singer of a rock and roll group, the Drifters, not to be confused with the U.S. group of the same name. 1950s entrepreneur Harry Greatorex wanted the up-and-coming rock and roll singer to change from his real name of Harry Webb. The name Cliff was adopted as it sounded like Cliff Face, which suggested rock. It was Move-It writer Ian Samwell who suggested that the former Harry Webb be surnamed Richard as a tribute to Webb's musical hero Little Richard. Before their first large-scale appearance, at the Regal Ballroom in Ripley, Derbyshire in 1958, they adopted the name Cliff Richard and the Drifters. The four members were Harry Webb, now going under the stage name Cliff Richard, Ian "Sammy" Samwell on guitar, Terry Smart on drums and Norman Mytham on guitar. None of the other three played with the later and better-known Shadows, although Samwell wrote songs for Richard's later career. For his debut session, Norrie Parama provided Richard with Schoolboy Crush, a cover of an American record by Bobby Helms. Richard was permitted to record one of his own songs for the B-side. This was Move It, written by the Drifters' Samwell on a number 715 Green Line bus on the way to Richard's house for a rehearsal. For the Move It session, Parama used the session guitarist Ernie Shears on lead guitar and Frank Clark on bass. There are various stories about why the A-side was replaced by the intended B-side. One is that Norrie Parama's young daughter raved about the B-side. Another was that influential TV producer Jack Good, who used the act for his TV show Oh Boy, wanted the only song on his show to be Move It. Richard was quoted as saying, "The single went to number 2 on the UK singles chart." John Lennon credited Move It as being the first British rock record. In the early days, Richard was marketed as the British equivalent to Elvis Presley. Like previous British rockers such as Tommy Steele and Marty Wilde, Richard adopted Presley-like dress and hairstyle. In performance he struck a pose of rock attitude, rarely smiling or looking at the audience or camera. His late 1958 and early 1959 follow-up singles, High Class Baby, and Livin' Lovin' Doll, were followed by Mean Streak, which carried a rocker's sense of speed and passion, and Lionel Bart's Living Doll. It was on Living Doll that the Drifters began to back Richard on record. It was his fifth record, and became his first #1 single. By that time the group's lineup had changed with the arrival of Jet Harris, Tony Meehan, Hank Marvin and Bruce Welch. The group was obliged to change its name to The Shadows after legal complications with the American group The Drifters as Living Doll entered the American Top 40, licensed by ABC Paramount. Living Doll was used in Richard's debut film Serious Charge, but as a country standard, rather than a rock and roll standard. The Shadows were not a typical backing group. They became contractually separate from Richard, and the group received no royalties for records backing Richard. In 1959, the Shadows, then still the Drifters, landed an Emmy recording contract of their own, for independent recordings. That year, they released 3 singles, 2 of which featured double-sided vocals and 1 of which had instrumental A and B sides. They thereafter had several major hits, including 5 UK #1s. The band also continued to appear and record with Richard and wrote many of his hits. On more than one occasion, a Shadows instrumental replaced a Richard song at the top of the British charts. Richard's 5th single Living Doll triggered a softer, more relaxed, sound. Subsequent hits, the #1s Travelin' Light, and I Love You, and also A Voice in the Wilderness lifted from his film Espresso Bongo and Theme for a Dream cemented Richard's status as a mainstream pop entertainer along with contemporaries such as Adam Faith and Billy Fury. Throughout the early 1960s, his hits were consistently in the top 5. In 1961, EMI Records organised Richard's 21st birthday party at its London headquarters in Manchester Square, led by his producer Norrie Paramor. Photographs of the celebrations were incorporated into Richard's next album 21 Today, in which Tony Meehan joined in, despite, then, having very recently left the Shadows to be replaced by Brian Bennett. Typically, the Shadows closed the first half of the show with a 30-minute set of their own, then backed Richard on his show-closing 45-minute stint, as exemplified by the retrospective CD album release of Live at the ABC Kingston 1962. Tony Meehan and Jet Harris left the group in 1961 and 1962 respectively, and later had their own chart successes for Decca. The Shadows added bass players Brian Locking, 1962-63, and then John Rostill, 1963-68, and took on Brian Bennett permanently on drums. In the early days, particularly on EP and album releases, Richard sometimes recorded without the Shadows to cater to other styles with the Norrie Paramor Orchestra, with Tony Meehan and then Brian Bennett as a session drummer. Even after the Beatles' rise, he continued to achieve hits, although more often with an orchestra rather than the Shadows, a revival of It's All in the Game, and Constantly, a revived single of a well-known Italian hit. A session under the direction of Billy Sherrill in Nashville, Tennessee yielded two more top 2 hits, The Minute You're Gone, and Wind Me Up in 1965. Richard, and in particular the Shadows, never achieved star status in the United States. In 1960 they toured the United States and were well received, but lackluster support and distribution from a revolving door of American record labels proved an obstacle to long-term success there, despite several chart records by Richard, including the aforementioned It's All in the Game on Epic, via a renewed linking of the worldwide Columbia labels after Philips ended its distribution deal with CBS. To the Shadows' chagrin, Apache reached #1 in the US via a cover version by Danish guitarist Jørgen and Morn, which was almost unchanged from their worldwide hit. Richard and the band appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show, which was crucial for the Beatles, but these performances did not help them gain sustained success in North America. Richard and the Shadows appeared in 6 feature films, including a debut in the 1959 film Serious Charge, but most notably in The Young Ones, Summer Holiday, Wonderful Life and Finders Keepers. These films created their own genre known as the Cliff Richard musical, and led to Richard being named the #1 cinema box office attraction in Britain for both 1962 and 1963, beating that of even James Bond. The title song of The Young Ones became his biggest selling single in the United Kingdom, selling over 1 million copies in the UK. The irreverent 1980s TV sitcom The Young Ones took its name from Richard's 1962 film. In mid-1963, Cliff and the Shadows appeared for a season in Blackpool, where Richard had his portrait modelled by Victor Hyfron.
1964-75, Changing to Circumstances.
As with the other existing rock acts in Britain, Richard's career was affected by the sudden advent of the Beatles and the Mersey sound in 1963 and 1964. He continued to have hits in the charts throughout the 1960s, albeit not at the level that he had enjoyed before. Nor did doors opening to him in the US market. He was not considered part of the British invasion, and despite 4 Hot 100 hits, including the top 25 It's All in the Game between August 1963 and August 1964, the American public had little awareness of him. Richard's 1965 UK number 12 hit On My Word ended a run of 23 consecutive top 10 UK hits between A Voice in the Wilderness in 1960 to The Minute You're Gone in 1965, which, to date, is still a record number of consecutive top 10 UK hits for a male artist. Richard continued having international hits, including 1967's The Day I Met Marie, which reached number 10 in the UK singles chart and number 5 in the Australian charts. Although baptized as an Anglican, Richard did not appear to practice the faith in his early years. In 1964, he became an active Christian, and his faith has become an important aspect of his life. Standing up publicly as a Christian affected his career in several ways. Initially, he believed that he should quit rock and roll, feeling he could no longer be the rocker who had been called a crude exhibitionist, and too sexy for TV. Richard intended at first to reform his ways, and become a teacher, but Christian friends advised him not to abandon his career just because he had become an active Christian. Soon after, Richard re-emerged, performing with Christian groups and recording some Christian material. He still recorded secular songs with the Shadows, but devoted a lot of his time to Christian work, including appearances with the Billy Graham Crusades. As time progressed, Richard balanced his faith and work, enabling him to remain one of the most popular singers in Britain as well as one of its best-known Christians. Richard acted in the 1967 film Two a Penny, released by Billy Graham's Worldwide Pictures, in which he played Jamie Hopkins, a young man who gets involved in drug dealing while questioning his life after his girlfriend changes her attitude. He released the live album Cliff in Japan in 1967. In 1968, he sang the UK's entry in the Eurovision Song Contest, Congratulations by Bill Martin and Phil Coulter. It lost by just 1 point to Spain's La La La. According to John Kennedy O'Connor's The Eurovision Song Contest, the official history, this was the closest result yet in the contest and Richard locked himself in the toilet to avoid the nerves of the voting. In May 2008 a Reuters news report claimed that voting in the competition had been fixed by the Spanish dictator leader, Francisco Franco, to ensure that the Spanish entry won, allowing them to host the contest the following year, 1969. In particular, it is claimed that Spanish television executives offered to buy programs in exchange for votes. The story was widely covered and featured on UK Channel 4 News as a main story, with Jon Snow interviewing author and historian John Kennedy O'Connor about the matter. Eurovision later ended voting by national juries in a bid to eradicate such alleged scams. Nevertheless, Congratulations was a huge hit throughout Europe and Australia and yet another #1 in April 1968. After the Shadows split in 1968, Richard continued to record. During the 1970s, Richard took part in several television shows and fronted his own show It's Cliff Richard from 1970 to 1976. It starred Olivia Newton-John, Hank Marvin and Una Stubbs, and included A Song for Europe. He began 1970 by appearing live on the BBC's review of the 60s music scene, Pop Go the 60s, which was broadcast across Britain and Europe on December 31, 1969. He performed Bachelor Boy with the Shadows and Congratulations solo. In 1972, he made a short BBC television comedy film called The Case with appearances from comedians and his first ever duets with a woman, Olivia Newton-John. He went on to release a double live album Cliff Live in Japan 1972 featuring Newton-John. His final acting role on the silver screen was in 1973 when he starred in the film Take Me High. In 1973, he sang the British Eurovision entry Power to All Our Friends. The song finished third, close behind Luxembourg's Te Reconnaîtras, and Spain's Heirs to. This time, Richard took Valium to overcome his nerves and his manager was almost unable to wake him for the performance. Richard also hosted the BBC's qualifying heat for the Eurovision Song Contest, A Song for Europe, in 1970, 1971 and 1972 as part of his BBC TV variety series. He presented the Eurovision Song Contest previews for the BBC in 1971 and 1972. In 1975, he released the single Hunky Tonk Angel produced by Hank Marvin and John Farrar, oblivious to its connotations or hidden meanings. As soon as Richard was notified that a hunky tonk angel was southern U.S. slang for a prostitute, Richard ordered EMI to withdraw it. He refused to promote it despite making a video for it. EMI agreed to his demand despite positive sales. About 1,000 copies are known to exist on vinyl.
1976-94, Comeback.
In 1976, the decision was made to repackage Richard as a rock artist. That year Bruce Welch relaunched Cliff's career and produced the landmark album I'm Nearly Famous, which included the successful but controversial guitar-driven track Devil Woman, Richard's first true hit in the US, and the ballad Miss Unites. Richard's fans were excited about this revival of a performer who had been a part of British rock from its early days. Many music names such as Jimmy Page, Eric Clapton and Elton John were seen sporting I'm Nearly Famous badges, pleased that their boyhood idol was getting back into the heavier rock in which he had begun his career. Notwithstanding this, Richard continued to release albums with contemporary Christian music content in parallel with his rock and pop albums. For example, Small Corners from 1978 contain the single Yes He Lives. On December 31, 1976, he performed his latest single Hey, Mr. Dreammaker on BBC One's A Jubilee of Music, celebrating British pop music for Queen Elizabeth II's impending Silver Jubilee. In 1979, Richard teamed up once again with producer Bruce Welch for the pop hit single We Don't Talk Anymore, written by Alan Tanney, which hit #1 in the UK and #7 in the US. Brian Ferry added hummed backing vocals to the song. The record made Richard the first act to reach the Hot 100's top 40 in the 1980s who had also been there in each of the 3 previous decades. The song was quickly added on to the end of his latest album Rock 'N' Roll Juvenile. It was his first time at the top of the UK singles chart in over 10 years and the song would become his biggest selling single worldwide, selling almost 5 million copies throughout the world. The accompanying music video was the 6th to appear on American cable channel MTV when it debuted on August 1, 1981. At long last he had some extended success in the United States following Devil Woman. The follow-up Dreamin' peaked at #10. His 1980 duet Suddenly with Olivia Newton-John, from the film Xonad, peaked at #20. In the UK, Dreamin' peaked at #8 and Carrie reached #4. In a retrospective review of the single, AllMusic journalist Dave Thompson praised Carrie as being an enthrallingly atmospheric number. One of the most electrifying of all Cliff Richard's recordings. In 1980, Richard changed his name by deed poll from Harry Webb to Cliff Richard and received the OBE from the Queen for services to music and charity. The singles chart saw his most consistent period of top 20 hits since the mid-1960s, with A Little in Love, Dreamin', and Suddenly on the Hot 100 at the same time at the end of 1980. Richard continued with a string of top 10 albums, including I'm No Hero, Wired for Sound, Now You See Me, Now You Don't, and, marking his 25th year in show business, Silver. In 1986, Richard reached #1 by teaming up with the Young Ones to re-record his smash hit Living Doll for the charity Comic Relief. Along with the song, the recording contained comedy dialogue between Richard and the Young Ones. That same year Richard opened in the West End as a rock musician called upon to defend Earth in a trial set in the Andromeda Galaxy in the multimedia Dave Clark musical Time. 2 Richard singles, She's So Beautiful, which reached #17 in the UK and Born to Rock 'N' Roll, were released respectively in 1985 and 1986 from the concept album recorded for Time. In August 1986, Richard was involved in a 5-car crash in torrential rain on the M4 motorway in West London. Richard's car was a write-off as another car swerved and braked hard. Richard hurt his back in the accident, but was not seriously injured in the crash. Police called for a cab from the accident scene so that he was able to perform that night in the Time musical. Richard said, "I'm lucky to be here after the show." He said that his seatbelt prevented him from flying through the windscreen. In October 1986, All I Ask of You, a duet that Richard recorded with Sarah Brightman from the Andrew Lloyd Webber musical version of The Phantom of the Opera reached #3 in the UK singles chart. 1987 saw Richard record his Always Guaranteed album, which became his best-selling album of all new material. It contained the 2 top 10 hit singles My Pretty One, and Some People. Richard concluded his 30th year in music by achieving a UK Christmas #1 single in 1988 with Mistletoe and Wine, while simultaneously holding the #1 positions on the album and video charts with the compilation Private Collection summing up his biggest hits from 1979 to 1988. Mistletoe and Wine was Richard's 99th UK single and spent 4 weeks at the top of the chart. It was the best-selling UK single of 1988, shifting 750,000 copies. In 1989, Richard received the Brits' highest award, the Outstanding Contribution Award. In June 1989, he filled London's Wembley Stadium for 2 nights with a spectacular title, the event in front of a combined audience of 144,000 people. Richard's 1989 UK #2 hit single The Best of Me received positive reviews from critics and established him as the first British artist to release 100 singles. The Best of Me was included in the top 10 album Stronger, together with the UK #3 Just Don't Have the Heart, written and produced by Mike Stock, Matt Aitken and Pete Waterman, and the 1990 UK #11 hit From a Distance. Later in 1990, Richard scored his second UK Christmas #1 single with Saviour's Day, a song written by Chris Eaton, which became Richard's 13th UK #1 single and his 100th top 40 hit. The video for Saviour's Day featured Richard singing on top of the limestone arch landmark of Durdledore in Dorset. Richard unsuccessfully bid for the Christmas #1 spot again with We Should Be Together and Healing Love in 1991 and 1993 respectively, the latter being taken from his #1 studio album Cliff Richard, the album. The next few years saw Richard concentrate on bringing the musical Heathcliff to the stage. Back in the UK during the next years and throughout the 1980s, Richard remained one of the best-known music artists in the country. In the space of a few years he worked with Elton John, Mark Knopfler, Julian Lennon, Freddie Mercury, Stevie Wonder, Phil Everly, Janet Jackson, Sheila Walsh and Van Morrison. Richard also reunited with Olivia Newton-John. Meanwhile, the Shadows later reformed, and again split. They recorded on their own, but also reunited with Richard in 1978, 1984, 1989-90, 2004, and 2009 for some concerts.
1995 to 2007, knighthood.
On June 17, 1995 Richard was appointed a Knight Bachelor, and invested on October 25, 1995, and became the first rock star to be so honored. Bob Geldof had received his honorary knighthood 9 years earlier. In 1996, he led the Wimbledon Centre Court crowd in singing during a rain delay when asked by Wimbledon officials to entertain the crowd. In 1998, Richard demonstrated that radio stations were refusing to play his music by releasing his latest single Can't Keep This Feeling In on a white label under the pseudonym of Black Knight. The single was featured on playlists until the true artist was revealed. In 1999, controversy again arose regarding radio stations refusing to play his releases when EMI, Richard's label since 1958, refused to release his song, The Millennium Prayer, having judged that the song did not have commercial potential. Richard took it to an independent label, Papillon, which released the charity recording, In Aid of Children's Promise. The single went on to top the UK chart for 3 weeks, becoming his 14th #1 and the 3rd highest-selling single of his career. Richard's next album, in 2001, was a covers project, Wanted, followed by another top 10 album, Cliff at Christmas. The holiday album contained both new and older recordings, including the single Santa's List, which reached #5 in 2003. For his 7-day-long 60th birthday party Richard in conjunction with OK Magazine hired a cruise boat to Monte Carlo and sailed with his top 80, out of a possible 500, specially invited guests, mostly from British showbiz, to France. Among the guests were Olivia Newton-John, Shirley Bassey, Sue Barker, Gloria Hunniford, Tim Rice, Mike Reed, Richard's 3 sisters, etc. Richard went to Nashville, Tennessee for his next album project in 2004, employing a writers' conclave to give him the pick of all new songs for the album Something's Going On. It was another top 10 album, and produced 3 UK top 20 singles, Something's Going On, I Cannot Give You My Love, with Barry Gibb of the Bee Gees, and What Car? On June 14, 2004, Richard joined the Shadows on stage at the London Palladium. The Shadows had decided to reform for another tour of the UK. It was not to be their last tour together though, as they would reform once again for a final tour 5 years later in 2009. Two's Company, an album of duets released in 2006, was another top 10 success for Richard and included newly recorded material with Brian May, Dionne Warwick, Anne Murray, Barry Gibb and Daniel O'Donnell, plus some previously recorded duets with artists such as Phil Everly, Elton John and Olivia Newton-John. Two's Company was released to coincide with the UK leg of his latest world tour, Here and Now, which included lesser-known songs such as My Kinda Life, How Did She Get Here, Hey Mr. Dreammaker, For Life, A Matter of Moments, When the Girl in Your Arms, and the Christmas single 21st Century Christmas, which debuted at number 2 on the UK singles chart. Another compilation album, Love. The album was released on November 12, 2007. Like Two's Company before it, this album includes both previously released material and newly recorded songs, namely Waiting for a Girl Like You, When You Say Nothing at All Out of Love, If You're Not the One, and When I Need You. The last was released as a single, reaching number 38. The album peaked at number 13.
2008 present, 50th anniversary and The Shadows reunion.
2008, Richard's 51st year in the music business saw the release of the 8-CD box set And They Said It Wouldn't Last, My 50 Years in Music. In September, a single celebrating his 50 years in pop music, titled Thank You for a Lifetime was released. On September 14, 2008 it reached number 3 on the UK music charts. On November 11, 2008, Richard's official website announced that Cliff and the Shadows would reunite to celebrate their 50th anniversary in the music business. A month later they performed at the Royal Variety Performance. In 2009, Cliff and the Shadows brought their partnership to an end with the Golden Anniversary Concert Tour of the UK. A new album by Richard and the Shadows was released in September 2009. Titled Reunited, it was their first studio project in 40 years. The 28 tracks recorded comprised 25 re-recordings of their earlier work, with 3 new tracks, originally from that era, and earlier, the single Singing the Blues, along with Eddie Cochran's Come On Everybody, and the Frankie Ford's hit Sea Cruise. The album charted at number 6 in the UK charts in its opening week and peaked at number 4. The reunion tour continued into Europe in 2010. In June 2009, it was reported by Sound Kitchen Studios in Nashville that Richard was to return there shortly to record a new album of original recordings of jazz songs. He was to record 14 tracks in a week. Richard performed Congratulations at the 70th birthday celebrations of Queen Margrethe in Denmark on April 13, 2010. On October 14, 2010, Richard celebrated his 70th birthday and to mark the occasion, he performed a series of 6 concerts at the Royal Albert Hall, London. To accompany the concerts, a new album of cover versions of swing standards, Bold as Brass, was released on October 11. After a week of promotion, Richard flew out to rehearse for the German Night of the Proms concerts in Belgium at the end of October. He made a surprise appearance at the Antwerp concert of the Night of the Proms on Thursday 28 October 2010 and sang We Don't Talk Anymore to a great reaction from the surprised 20,000 fans at Sportpaleis Antwerp. In all, he toured 12 German cities in November and December 2010, during the Night of the Proms concerts, as the headline act. The total of 18 concerts were attended by over 300,000 fans. Richard performed a selection of hits and tracks from the Bold as Brass album. In November 2010, he achieved his 3rd consecutive UK #1 music DVD in 3 years with the DVD release of Bold as Brass. In October 2011, Richard released his Soulicious album, containing duets with American soul singers including Percy Sledge, Ashford Simpson, Roberta Flack, Freda Payne and Candy Staton. The album was produced by Lamont Dozier and was supported by a short UK arena tour. Soulicious became Richard's 41st top 10 UK hit album. He was among the performers at the Diamond Jubilee concert held outside Buckingham Palace on June 4, 2012. On June 30, 2012, Richard helped to carry the Olympic torch from Derby to Birmingham as part of the torch relay for the 2012 Summer Olympics in London. Richard said that his run with the Olympic torch would be one of his top 10 memories. In November 2013, Richard released the 100th album of his career, The Fabulous Rock 'n' Roll Songbook. To that point Richard had released 47 studio albums, 35 compilations, 11 live albums and 7 film soundtracks. In June 2014, Richard will open for Morrissey at a live concert at New York's Barclays Center. Morrissey said that he was honored and thrilled to have Richard on the bill.
Lack of commercial support.
Richard has openly complained about the lack of commercial support he receives from radio stations and record labels. He spoke about this on the Alan Titchmarsh Show on ITV in December 2007, pointing out that while new bands needed airplay for promotion and sales, long-established artists like him also relied upon airplay for the same ends. He also noted that 1980s radio stations did play his records and that this went some way to help sales and maintain his media presence. In the BBC Radio 2 documentary Cliff, Take Another Look, he pointed out that many documentaries charting the history of British music, for example, I'm in a rock and roll band, failed to mention him, or The Shadows. In 1998, Chris Evans, the then breakfast show host on Virgin Radio, vowed he would never again play a record by Richard, stating that he was too old. In June 2004, British disc jockey Tony Blackburn was suspended from his radio job at Classic Gold Digital for playing records by Richard against station policy. The head of programs, Paul Baker, sent an email to Blackburn stating that Richard doesn't match our brand values. He's not on the playlist, and you must stop playing him. On Blackburn's next morning breakfast show, he read a printout of the email live on air to the show's 400,000 listeners and went on to play 2 songs by Richard. Classic Gold managing director John Besh later confirmed Blackburn's suspension from the show. In 2011, digital station Absolute Radio 60s, dedicated to playing popular music from the 1960s, announced they would not be playing any of Richard's records because they claim they did not fit the cool sound we're trying to create. DJ Pete Mitchell claimed timeless acts of the decade that remain relevant today are the Beatles, the Stones, the Doors and the Who, not Sir Cliff. Richard responded to this by saying, they're lying to themselves, and more importantly they're lying to the public. Richard has spoken of his irritation that stars who debauch themselves, get addicted to drugs then kick them, get all the praise. In 2009, Richard said, I've always maintained I'm the most radical rock and roll singer Britain has ever seen. I was the only one who didn't spit or swear or sleep around. I didn't do drugs. I didn't get drunk. I didn't indulge in soulless sex. And I've always felt comfortable with the decisions I've taken. In 2011, Sam Leith, a journalist from The Guardian, wrote of Richard's lack of commercial support among radio stations, his uncompromising Christianity, his clean living ways, and his connoisseurship of the fruits of his Portuguese winery have made him an object of incomprehension, even ridicule, for the uncultured, alcopop-drinking younger generation. In December 2013, Richard said that he felt 2 of his particular singles, Mistletoe and Wine, and The Millennium Prayer, had created a negative reaction against him. He said, airplay is vital for single hits. The only way I can have a fair competition is if your records are on the radio. There is an ageism in the radio industry. If you ask me to record a new song, I'm not sure it would get the support it needs. Richard has received support from author and rock music critic Tony Parsons who said, if you don't like at least some Cliff Richard, then you don't like pop music. Musician Sting has also defended Richard, stating, Cliff Richard is in my opinion one of Britain's finest singers technically and emotionally.
Personal life.
Richard's father, Roger Webb, died in 1961. His mother, Dorothy, died in October 2007, aged 87, after a decade with Alzheimer's disease. In a 2006 interview, he spoke about the difficulties he and his sisters had in dealing with their mother's condition. Richard is a lifelong bachelor. In a 3-page letter written in October 1961 to his first serious girlfriend, Australian dancer Delia Wiggs, made public in April 2010 after her death from cancer, Richard writes, being a pop singer I have to give up one priceless thing, the right to any lasting relationship with any special girl. I've just had to make, probably, one of the biggest decisions I'm ever going to make, and I'm hoping that it won't hurt you too much." The couple had been dating for 18 months. In the letter he goes on to say, "I couldn't give up my career, besides the fact that my mother and sisters, since my father's death, rely on me completely. I have showbiz in my blood now and I would be lost without it." Richard urged her to find someone who is free to love you as you deserve to be loved, and who is able to marry you. After Delia Wicks died in 2010, aged 71, her brother Graham Wicks said that she had been devastated by Richard's decision to end their relationship, describing Richard as a very pleasant man. At the age of 22, Richard had a brief romance with the actress Una Stubbs. Later in the 1960s, Richard considered marriage to the dancer Jackie Irving. Richard described Irving as utterly beautiful, and says for a time they were inseparable. In his autobiography, Richard stressed that sex is not one of the things that drives me, but he also wrote of his seduction by Carol Costa, who at the time was the estranged wife of Jet Harris. In the 1980s, Richard considered marriage to Sue Barker, a former French Open tennis champion and Wimbledon semi-finalist. In 2008, Richard said of his relationship with Barker, "I seriously contemplated asking her to marry me, but in the end I realized that I didn't love her quite enough to commit the rest of my life to her." Richard first met Barker in 1982. In an interview in February 1983, Richard spoke of the possibility of marriage with her. He said, "I'm seeing Sue, the only girl I want to see at the moment, and if marriage comes on the horizon, I shall relish it." In September 1983, Richard said that he had no immediate plans to marry Barker. He said, "It's not vital to get married and it's not vital to be a father. But I would like to settle down and have a family one day." In July 1984, Barker said of her romance with Richard, "I love him, he's great and I'm sure we love each other." In 1986, after Richard's romance with Barker had ended and she began dating tennis player Stephen Shaw, Richard said that he was still a friend of Barker. He said, "We have a mutual respect for each other and that means a lot to me." When later asked why he has never married, Richard said, "I've had a few false alarms. I've been in love, but marriage is a big commitment and being an artist consumes a great deal of time." He said that in the early 1970s he was in love with the singer and actress Olivia Newton-John. Richard said, "At the time when I and many of us were in love with Olivia, she was engaged to someone else. I'm afraid I lost the chance." When asked in February 2013 if he has regrets about not starting a family, Richard said that if he had been married with children he could not have devoted so much time to his career. He said, "My 3 sisters have children, and it's been wonderful to watch them grow up, get married and start families of their own. I've made sure I've always played a part in their lives. So while I think I would have been a good father, I've given myself to my family and I wouldn't have it any other way. My freedom allows me to continue my career. Had I been married, with children, I wouldn't be able to do what I do now." Although he has never married, Richard has rarely lived alone. For many years he shared his main home with his charity and promotions schedules manager, Bill Latham, and Latham's mother. In 1982, Richard described them as his second family. Latham's girlfriend, Jill, also lived at the house in Weybridge, Surrey, with them for a time. Richard often declines discussion about close relationships and when asked about suggestions that he may be homosexual has stated categorically that he is not. When the suggestions were first put to him in the late 1970s, Richard responded by saying, "It's untrue. People are very unfair with their criticism and their judgments. I've had girlfriends. But people seem to think that if a bloke doesn't sleep around he must be gay. Marriage is a very special thing to me. I'm certainly not going to do it just to make other people feel satisfied." In 1986, Richard said that rumors about his sexuality has previously been very painful to him. Later in 1996, Richard said, "I'm aware of the rumors, but I'm not gay." In an interview with David Frost in 2002, Richard said that his many good friends have prevented him from ever feeling lonely and he has always got someone he can talk to. In the interview on BBC Breakfast with Frost, Richard also said that when his friend, the British television presenter Jill Dando, was murdered in 1999 he was angry with God at that particular moment. Richard has been a family friend of the Northern Irish broadcaster Gloria Hunniford for over 40 years. When Hunniford's daughter Karen Keating was diagnosed with breast cancer and chose to keep her illness private from the public, Richard was among a small close circle of friends who knew of Keating's cancer. When Keating died in April 2004, Richard attended her funeral in Kent and performed his song Miss Unites in tribute to her. Richard has spoken of his friendship with John Macklin, an American former missionary whom Richard met in 2001 on a visit to New York. In 2008, Richard said, "John now spends most of his time looking after my properties, which means I don't have to. John and I have over time struck up a close friendship. He has also become a companion, which is great because I don't like living alone, even now." In 1971, Richard was a leading supporter of the nationwide Festival of Light, a movement formed by British Christians who were concerned about the development of the permissive society. Richard joined public figures such as Malcolm Muggeridge, Mary Whitehouse and Bishop Trevor Huddleston to demonstrate in London for love and family life, and against what the organisers called pornography and moral pollution. Richard was one of approximately 30,000 people gathering at London's Trafalgar Square to protest against the Swedish sex education film Language of Love, which was showing at a nearby cinema. In 2006, Richard received a Portuguese knighthood in which he was appointed Commander of the Order of Prince Henry, IH, this in recognition of his 40 years of personal and business involvement in that country. Richard finished number 56 in the 2002 100 Greatest Britons list, sponsored by the BBC and voted for by the public. In his 2008 autobiography, Richard wrote that his views on certain issues are less judgmental than when he was younger. He called on the Church of England to affirm people's commitment in same-sex marriage. He writes, "In the end, I believe, people are going to be judged for what they are. It seems to me that commitment is the issue, and if anyone comes to me and says, 'This is my partner, we are committed to each other,' then I don't care what their sexuality is. I'm not going to judge, I'll leave that to God." In 2009, the British media reported on a growing friendship between Richard and Cilla Black. The Daily Telegraph said that Richard and Black looked at properties together in Miami and were regularly seen together in Barbados, where they both own villas. Richard and Black reportedly enjoyed each other's company dining together in Marbella and watching tennis in the Royal Box at Wimbledon. The official party celebrating Richard's 70th birthday was held on October 23, 2010, with guests including Cilla Black, Elaine Page and Daniel O'Donnell. In 2010, Richard confirmed that he is no longer a resident of the United Kingdom and had been granted citizenship by Barbados, where he now spends most of his time. He said, "I'm officially a non-resident, although I will always be British and proud of it." He has retained a British property in Sunningdale, Berkshire.
Philanthropy.
Since March 1966, Richard has followed the practice of giving away at least a tenth of his income to charity. Richard has stated that two biblical principles have guided him in how to use his money. He said, "Firstly, it was the love of money, not money itself, that was the root of all evil. Secondly, to be good and responsible stewards of what was entrusted to us." For over 40 years Richard has been an active supporter of Tear Fund, a Christian charity that aims to tackle poverty in many countries across the world. He has made a number of overseas visits to see their work firsthand in countries such as Uganda, Bangladesh and Brazil. Richard has said, "Playing a part in relieving poverty is, as I see it, the responsibility of us all." Richard has been described as a generous donor to a leading dementia research charity, Alzheimer's Research UK. He has helped to raise funds and awareness of the disease by speaking publicly about his mother's condition. Richard has also supported numerous UK charities over many years through the Cliff Richard Charitable Trust, both through donations and by making personal visits to schools, churches, hospitals and homes for special needs children. Richard's passion for tennis, which was encouraged by his former girlfriend Sue Barker, also led him in 1991 to establish the Cliff Richard Tennis Foundation. The charity has encouraged thousands of primary schools in the UK to introduce the sport, with over 200,000 children taking part in the tennis sessions which tour the country. The foundation has since become part of the charitable wing of the Lawn Tennis Association. The Cliff Richard Charitable Trust gives grants on a quarterly basis, with about 50 different UK-registered charities benefiting each time. Richard's Trust mainly donates funds to charities working in medical research, with children and the elderly, and for those involved in helping people with disabilities.
Filmography.
1959, Serious Charge. 1960, Espresso Bongo. 1961, The Young Ones, also known as It's Wonderful to Be Young. 1963, Summer Holiday. 1964, Wonderful Life, also known as Swingers Paradise. 1966, Finders Keepers. 1966, Thunderbirds Are Geo, Voice as a Marionette. 1969, To a Penny. 1970, His Land. 1972, The Case, features Olivia Newton-John. 1973, Take Me High. 2012, Run for Your Wife, cameo role as a busker. 1960-63, The Cliff Richard Show, ATV Television. 1964-67, Cliff, ATV Television. 1965, Cliff and the Shadows, ATV Television. 1970-74, It's Cliff Richard featuring Hank Marvin, Una Stubbs and Olivia Newton-John, BBC Television. 1975-76, It's Cliff and Friends, BBC Television.
Theatre work.
Aladdin and His Wonderful Lamp, music by The Shadows and Norrie Parama. Cinderella, music by The Shadows and Norrie Parama. Time, music by Dave Clark. Heathcliff, music by John Farrar and lyrics by Sir Tim Rice.
Awards.
1977, Best British Male Solo Artist. 1982, Best British Male Solo Artist. 1989, Lifetime Achievement, Outstanding Contribution to Music, excluded The Shadows. 1980, Most Exciting Male Singer on TV. 1987, Best Male Singer. 1989, Favorite Singer. 1970, Male Pop Personality. 1971, Top Male Pop Personality. 1972, Top Male Pop Personality. 1958, Best New Disc or TV Singer. 1959, UK Male Singer. 1959, Best Single, Living Doll. 1960, Best UK Single, Living Doll. 1961, UK Male Singer. 1962, UK Male Singer. 1963, UK Male Singer. 1963, Best World Male Singer. 1964, UK Male Singer. 1964, UK Vocal Personality. 1965, UK Male Singer. 1966, UK Male Singer. 1966, UK Vocal Personality. 1967, UK Vocal Personality. 1968, UK Vocal Personality. 1969, British Vocal Personality. 1970, UK Male Singer. 1970, UK Vocal Personality. 1970, World's Best Recording Artist of the 60s. 1971, UK Male Singer. 1971, British Vocal Personality. 1972, UK Male Singer. 1972, British Vocal Personality. 1968, Most Performed Work, Congratulations by Bill Martin and Phil Coulter. 1970, Outstanding Services to Music. 1959, Best Male Singer. 1960, Top British Male Singer. 1962, the MN Award, Top Male Singer. 1962, Top British Male Singer. 1962, Top Single of the Year, The Young Ones. 1963, Best Male Singer. 1964, Best Male Singer. 1965, Best UK Male Singer. 1967, Top Male Singer. 1967, Best Dressed Male. 1968, Best Dressed Male. 1969, Best Dressed Male. 1970, Top British Male Singer, 1970, Best Dressed Male, 1970, Mr. Valentine, 1971, Mr. Valentine, 1964, Best Male Singer, Gold, 1964, Year-End Singles Charts, 1. Sag Knows Who I Am, Don't Talk to Him, 1965, Best Male Singer, Gold, 1980, Top International Male Singer, 1961, Record Mirror Survey, Most Successful Chart Records 1958-1961, No One, Cliff Richard, Living Doll. Richard had 3 of the top 5 records and a further 2 in the top 50. 1964, Record Mirror Poll, Best Dressed Singer in the World. 1961, Royal Variety Club, Show Business Personality. 1961, Weekend Magazine, Star of Stars. 1962, Motion Picture Herald Box Office Survey of 1962, Most Popular Male Film Actor. 1963, Motion Picture Herald Box Office Survey of 1963, Most Popular Male Film Actor. 1963-16, U.S. Magazine, Most Promising Singer. 1964, Billboard, U.S. Magazine, Best Recording Artist UK. 1969, Valentine Magazine, Mr. Valentine. 1970, National Viewers and Listeners Association, Outstanding Contribution to Religious Broadcasting and Light Entertainment. 1971, Record Mirror, UK Male Singer. 1974, Nordoff Robbins Music Therapy Committee, Silver Clef, Outstanding Services to the Music Industry. 1977, the Songwriters Guild of Great Britain, Golden Badge Award. 1979, Music Week, Special Award for 21 Years as Successful Recording Artists, Cliff Richard and the Shadows. 1979 Emmy Records, Gold Clock and Gold Key Award, Emmy celebrates 21-year partnership with Richard. 1980, Richard receives OBE from the Queen. 1980, BBC TV Multicolored Swap Shop, Best UK Male Vocalist. 1980, National Pop and Rock Awards, Best Family Entertainer. 1980, nationwide, in conjunction with Radio 1 and the Daily Mirror, Best Family Entertainer. 1981, Sunday Telegraph Readers Poll, Top Pop Star. 1981, Daily Mirror Readers Award, Outstanding Music Personality of the Year. 1989, the Lifetime Achievement Diamond Award, Antwerp. 1992, Spectacle Wearer of the Year. 1995, American Society of Composers, Authors and Publishers, Pied Piper Award. Richard became the first British recipient of ASCAP's coveted Pied Piper Award, which recognises outstanding contributions to the songwriter and music community. 1995, the formal investiture of Richard as Knight Bachelor took place at 10.30 am in Buckingham Palace on Wednesday 25 October. 1998, Dutch Edison, Lifetime Achievement Award. 2000, South Bank Awards, Outstanding Achievement Award. 2003, British Academy of Songwriters, Composers and Authors, Gold Badge of Merit. 2003, Lawn Tennis Association, 20 Years of Service to Tennis Award. 2004, Induction into UK Music Hall of Fame, representing the 1950s, Cliff and the Shadows. 2004, Ultimate Pop Star, No One Singles Recording Artist in UK. 2005, Avenue of Stars, Star on the Pavement, London. 2005, Rose d'Or Music Festival, Paris, Golden Rose. 2006, Commander of the Portuguese Order of Prince Henry, awarded for services